Hello and welcome to the Rover Media Podcast. We are the Midnight Choir. We thank you so much for joining us today. We are a podcast that specializes in interviews and news, and we are Anglophone in Quebec. It is very challenging to do that here in Quebec. Today we are interviewing Savanna Craig. She's a brilliant journalist here in Montreal, and she is doing incredible work. We are going to be talking about media freedom. She was recently arrested for doing her job. And so we wanted to talk about that and discuss the greater narrative of Canada, of Quebec, and the country, and how media freedom is going right now. So please, if you enjoy the work we are doing, go to therover.ca/support-us and check out what we are doing. Send us some money, or therover.ca/newsletter. And you can sign up for the free newsletter. Enjoy their great reporting. We've got stuff coming out on the justice system in Quebec. We've got stuff on illegal dumping here in Quebec. And we really thank you for all the support that you've given us so far. Things are going really great over here, and we want for momentum to start building. I lost the first 3 minutes of the podcast, and that is why you are getting this format of me telling you what to do instead of the usual format. So thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have an enjoyable time listening to this episode all about media freedom. So, Savanna, I would love to hear what has been happening in your life. You were recently arrested illegally. So I would love to hear more about this.
I was arrested while reporting on a pro-Palestine demonstration in downtown Montreal on April 15th. This demonstration was hosted inside the headquarters of Scotiabank in downtown Montreal, the Montreal headquarters. Mm-hmm. And activists were essentially hosting a blockade in front of both the teller booths and the ATMs inside of this bank, essentially to disrupt business as usual. Scotiabank invests money in Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli defense contractor. And essentially activists were there to apply pressure to demand Scotiabank to divest from Elbit Systems. And, you know, what went down is not long after the activists began their blockade. And, you know, essentially they were not only blockading, but chanting. They were also throwing money that they had printed out with blood edited on it, essentially just to kind of, I guess, remind Scotiabank, you know, what their investments are ultimately contributing to, which is the violence in Gaza as well as in the West Bank. And yeah, I was reporting both on my phone, filming on my camera as I usually do. And not long after the demonstration started, police were called. And when they entered, I identified myself as a journalist right away. Essentially, it wasn't right away that my arrest was announced. I was just guided to go into a certain place within the bank, and I complied with the officers. And after this time, I kept reporting. It's still on my Instagram. There's a report of myself on camera just explaining the situation. And when I finally realized that I was arrested, I was quite shocked. It's not too shocking because press freedom violations is something I've been following for a while globally as well as in Canada, because there have been many arrests in recent years. But, I don't think you can ever fully prepare for when it happens.
Right, especially when it happens to you.
Yeah.
Because you're studying this intellectually, essentially.
Yeah, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just doing my job.
You were standing there and you had your badge out, right?
Yeah.
You were just holding it in front of them and they just ignored it.
I think I made it pretty clear I was a journalist.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any confusion, but despite this, I was still treated that I was not a journalist. And I mean, where it stands now is I don't officially have charges laid against me.
Right.
The court system in Montreal is notoriously quite slow. So right now my charges are kind of in limbo, which is an issue within itself. But if I am to be charged, what it would be is criminal charges of mischief. And this can be a fine of up to $5,000. I believe it's 2 to 3 years in prison. I can also be prevented from leaving the country.
This is insane. Because you were standing there with your press pass.
Because I was doing my job.
That's insane. We don't think of that kind of thing happening in Canada. We talk about things like, the journalist who was killed in Saudi Arabia and stuff like that, or Russia. But we don't ever, I don't think most people contemplate the fact that this is a reality that can occur in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Where we have very enshrined freedoms for the media.
Absolutely. And I think, in response to my arrest, I think there's been a lot of shock I've seen online, surprise I've seen from people when they approach me to discuss it. And I absolutely understand the shock and surprise, but this really isn't nothing new. My case is just another case in the growing trend of press freedom violations in Canada, and one that a trend that I think is increasing.
Can you tell me more about this trend within Canada? I'd love to hear about another friend of ours, Una. But what else has been happening across Canada besides Una?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. So I've been following it. I've been following the violation of press freedom since 2016. I was a student in the journalism program at that time, and Justin Brake, a journalist with The Independent, he was arrested both on civil and criminal charges in Muskrat Falls, which is in Newfoundland and Labrador, and he was essentially following activists who were hosting a protest on a hydro production site. And Brake's case lasted in the courts for many years, and essentially it was a defining moment for press freedom in Canada.
Okay.
Because essentially Brake was included within this injunction saying that, activists didn't have the right to be on this land, and he was included within it. And there was this huge debate, within public society of should journalists be even listed within injunctions in the first place. And as a result of his case, the charges were dropped, both civil and criminal charges. But there was this determination that journalists should not be included within injunctions. And just later that year, after that was determined, 2 journalists were arrested for a very similar thing and also included with an injunction. This was both Amber Bracken and Michael Toledano, who were reporting on the Wet'suwet'en protests in northern British Columbia. And in their case, they were held in detention by the RCMP for 3 days. They were given punitive treatment. The light was on for 24 hours, no access to toothbrush, to soaps. And Bracken is actually taking the RCMP to court to sue them over it.
As they should.
Yeah.
As they should. Yeah.
So, we'll see what happens with that case. But, a friend of mine and someone I've worked alongside, in various protests I've reported on, Una Barret, she works at Pivot, and she was essentially covering a demonstration near the Montreal airport. Yeah. The Last Generation, they're an environment activist group, and, they had glued their hands to the sidewalk in essentially, a protest which causes some issue for the police.
Yeah. If you didn't see it, there's quite a few news reports. I'll link it in the description below. It was a protest against climate change because I think the number one contributor across the globe to climate change and carbon emissions is the airline industry. Not just for travel, but for consumerism, for shipping goods across the planet. So this was a protest against that here at the Montreal Pierre Trudeau Airport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for providing context on that. And Una, we've spoken about it a few times, but essentially, she said that before the police arrived, she was just doing her job. She had the ability to, be there near the activists, filmed as she pleased. And when the cops arrived, she was essentially asked to move further from the protesters. And she complied within this. She complied with their demands. But Where the issues sort of started to intensify is when a police officer actually grabbed her arm. This was caught on video. Una also said that she was pushed by an officer as well. An officer called her "Hey girl" in French. She's a woman, but okay. And she identified, similar to my case, numerous times that she was a journalist. And an officer told her that she didn't look like a journalist. I mean, I think that's a common issue with a lot of recent arrests, including mine, is that there's kind of this critique over, looking like a journalist.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what we're supposed to look like. And I mean, I think that something that not just police officers, but the public should understand in general is that journalism is a fast changing industry. And, no longer do we just have CBC or CTV journalists on site. We have journalists who look like me, who look like yourself, who look like Una. And I think for myself, I mean, I don't think I need to wear a pantsuit. I don't think I need to have a satellite truck with me to be a journalist.
Yeah.
And something, interesting with Una's case is that I think it was just a few weeks before this happened to her. I published a piece in Al Jazeera just essentially talking about, my case and how this is, contributing to just another case essentially in the growing trend of press freedom violations in Canada. And there was this paragraph where I said, I'd actually love to read it.
Go ahead.
If it's okay. This is the paragraph. Over the past few years, a pattern of arrests has emerged, with police specifically targeting journalists working freelance or with smaller outlets. Many of these journalists have been covering Indigenous-led protests or blockades. Often they claim that the media workers they come after do not look like journalists. This is exactly what happened to Una. Just a few weeks later, she was working at a small outlet. She was covering a blockade. She was told she doesn't look like a journalist. And it's just the same thing keeps happening. And it's not being stopped. So to me, I mean, I'm so concerned because how bad does it have to get before the political will comes to actually stop this issue?
Does it have anything to do with gender? Is a real question I have in my mind.
I mean, there are many cases of male journalists being arrested in Canada. But I think when it does happen to a woman, it is intensified where, we are taken, there are further, it's taken to another level to, I think, critique the way we look. Also, myself and Una, we're both quite young.
Yeah.
I wasn't called a girl, but I think I experience it at least almost once every time I go out and report that, it's like, oh, is this for your school project?
Jesus Christ. The infantilization of young women is a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's interesting to think about because, women who work in professional fields are not taken seriously enough. And if you dress nice and you look beautiful, like you're just trying to manipulate looks to get ahead. And if you don't focus on your looks like that, you should focus on your looks, otherwise you won't get ahead.
Yeah.
And so it's like no matter what a woman does especially in like a traditionally male dominated industry, you cannot win. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, I think it kind of even goes beyond, arrests by police. It's just the critique and treatment of women in media in general of, it's like she's wearing too much makeup. She's not wearing enough makeup, how she dresses, even
instant critique with women. No one does that to men. Sometimes, but rarely. It's not the first thing you think of when you see a man. You go, oh, like even if somebody's a little sloppy or slovenly, you're just like, well, is he acting professional? Is he strong? Is he masculine? You're like, but with women, it's like, well, does she look all right? It's the first thing people go to, right?
Yeah, and something I'm very concerned about that has not been an issue in Canada from what I've seen, but is an issue in other countries where a silencing tactic used towards women journalists is deepfake. And for those who don't know deepfake, it's essentially this AI software where you can have your face edited on someone else's body. And there was this kind of, funny version of, I think, I forget who did it, but Jordan Peele edited himself on Obama. I think this happened a few years ago. And I think, deepfake can be used for funny ways, but it's also kind of created this fear within this industry of how do we know if a clip is valid or not, because the software to determine whether something's deepfake or not lags behind deepfake itself. But something that's not discussed enough in the industry is that this is being used to target women journalists.
Yeah.
And, women journalists who speak out against regimes, speak out against their governments, and do essential reporting, they have had their faces deepfaked on pornography. And it's this thing of, it can be taken offline, but the damage is already done.
It can be taken out. It's too late. If it's online, it's too late. You, the reality with the internet is the moment something's up, if it gets viral at all, it's everywhere. You're never getting rid of it. Never. And that's a genuine fear, and it's an exclusively women have to worry about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember even in my own journalism class when we spoke about deepfake, this is many years ago, it was only this focus on, how this is a threat to verifying if a video is real or not, in the context of reporting. And I was the only one to bring up how can it be used to silence journalists?
Right.
And there wasn't too much discussion after that, just kind of, the comment from the prof of that's a good point. But it's like, no, this needs to be discussed.
This needs to be discussed. We need to have stringent laws around it in Canada.
Absolutely.
Because it's if we don't start implementing laws now, it's like we're fucked.
The issue of deepfake, I always want to talk about it. I think it's important to talk about.
It is important to talk about.
I think it also connects to the issue of arrest because they're not being addressed until they get to this point where it's so bad. We have to face it. And I think, there's really such a lack of political will in Canada to address these arrests. And even Justin Trudeau, on World Press Freedom Day, he will make, some comment about how important journalists are to a free democracy, something like this. And he even spoke out a few years ago about a journalist, against a journalist who was arrested in Belarus. And he won't say anything when journalists in his own country are arrested. Even, after the case is closed, he won't condemn the arrest. And to me, that's really concerning, because I think that I don't believe that press freedom truly exists in Canada, and I think that some people are disillusioned to believe that it does. But I think my case, Una's case, Justin Brake, Amber Bracken, Michael Toledano, even I didn't mention Brandy Moring, who was arrested earlier this year. She was the first journalist and women journalist to be arrested in Canada this year. Very similar to my case, also not condemned.
It's interesting. This isn't really in our notes, but it's interesting discussing that because I think most people would regard Canada as one of the most free press societies on earth. So if that's the case, what are your thoughts, on the rest of the world? So look at the States. The States is in a much worse position than us. But if you think that we are not experiencing enough press freedom, well, what is it in the States, in your opinion?
I don't think I'm super well versed in the States.
That's fair.
But something I will mention is that, after I was arrested and I, just trying to understand the case, trying to protect myself legally, something I learned is that, at least what I was told, is that there are no lawyers in Canada that specialize in media law, because it's essentially not a big enough issue for a lawyer to specialize in this. Because, after I was arrested, I was thinking, okay, who specializes in this? I need a lawyer who really understands the journalism industry, who understands, can really be there to help defend me. But in the U.S., for example, I know that there are a lot of journalists who specialize in media law because it's just such an issue there.
Wow, that's insane. It will become an issue here then, because we're usually 10, 15 years behind the States in most socio-political issues. We're just slower on the uptake.
Yeah.
So if we don't start having people now, and also the States, I mean, it's almost incomparable because we have 1/10 their population, so 1/10 their journalists, I also would assume. But it's probably important for people to start considering that as a career option going into the future, especially with someone like Pierre Poilievre and me, and I forget who I was talking to. I think it was Rachel Gilmore. Me and Rachel were talking about how the difference in campaign fundraising letters of the Liberals, the NDP, the Green Party versus the Conservatives is insane. The Conservatives are really trying to be Trumpy. They're not good at it, mind you, but they're trying. And so their campaign fundraising letters are very much, the woke media is lying and it's not true. And then the rest of them are just like, we would like your support. And if we are about to go into a Conservative leadership for the next few years, this happens every time the Conservatives are in power. They defund the CBC. They defund any granting for media. They don't like, Conservatives traditionally do not like the media. They do not like unions. They do not like anything that questions governmental authority. And how's that for a hot take, TikTok? So it's one of those things where you're like, well, we should be preparing because we got 10 years of Pierre Poilievre coming up, probably, and then we'll switch back to the Liberals. And so we need to be ready for that 10 years of somebody trying to be a little bit more like Trump. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to be maybe thinking about the future of media, future of protecting people from deep fakes, the future of rampant sexism being not encouraged, but definitely not discouraged by governmental agencies.
Yes. Yeah, we need to prepare. Because I think that it's an issue for journalists, but it's an issue for everyone in Canada because, the more of us that are arrested, that are removed from the scenes, that are prevented from doing our job in any way, the less information that gets out to you. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like Una and myself, often the protests that we have attended, we're maybe one of the few journalists on the scenes. And often there isn't a lot of presence from, mainstream media outlets on the things that we cover. And whether those outlets are there or not, we have the right to report, but especially in cases where, there is a lack of journalists on the scene, we should be there. And
yes.
This information should get out.
We desperately need independent media to be there.
Yeah.
Especially since mainstream media is being slowly defunded, essentially.
Yeah.
They don't have the resources to get out everywhere.
No.
And freelancers are just passionate, so they're out there.
Yeah.
Because freelancers don't make money, y'all. I think you were invited, probably, but I don't think you made it out. There was the picnic over at Parc La Fontaine for all these independent media outlets, and I don't know if there was like maybe 4 people who did not have a second job.
Okay.
It was very few who were like not hustling on the side because of how little they make.
Yeah. It's not a stable industry.
It's not a paying industry. Listen, I want to know what sort of government policies are in place, if any, to protect the media.
I mean, what I know at the moment is that it's essentially, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that says that, there is a right to free speech and there is a right also to free press. And that's essentially what journalists are protected under. But there is work being done to push for more. And I know that with my arrest, like there has been push for for politicians to actually speak out and do something. One of the press freedom organization that has been advocating and supporting me through all of this chaos is the Coalition for Women in Journalism. And not too long ago, they released guidelines for Canada to essentially uphold in order to prevent more cases, such as what's happened to me, what happened to Brandy Morin, what happened to Una from happening. And there's numerous kind of parts within these recommendations. One of them is mandatory training for law enforcement to essentially, understand the rights of journalists and the importance of press freedom. I think that I don't understand how officers wouldn't already understand this, because I think that many members of the public already understand this. But, reminder is good.
Officers don't know shit.
No comment. Strengthening legal.
Savannah's much wiser than I am, is what we're learning.
Sometimes you have to be. Sometimes you're pushed to it. Anyway, no more on that. Strengthening legal protections for journalists. So, essentially asking for the Canadian government to enact laws to protect journalists from violence and harassment, which is another issue. It includes establishing clear guidelines for law enforcement on respecting press freedoms and imposing severe penalties for those who violate these protections. Another point is independent oversight and accountability, which I think is very important.
Separate from governmental agency.
Exactly, yeah. Establishing independent bodies to oversee police conduct is crucial, as Women Press Freedom says. They say that these bodies should have the authority to investigate incidences of violence against journalists and hold officers accountable, and also say that transparency within these investigations is vital. And there's other points on this, support networks for journalists, public awareness campaigns. You can see more details on this at Women Press Freedom online, and it's essentially called Canada Women Press Freedom Outline Essential Measures to Combat Police Violence Against Journalists
link it below.
In Canada. Yeah, thank you.
That's really good shit.
Yeah.
That's really good stuff.
Yeah.
I love, those are very good recommendations. I think Quebec could be a leading member for this, honestly. Quebec is generally speaking, Quebec has had the highest respect for media and democracy of pretty much all of Canada, except maybe BC.
Why do you say that?
Why would I say that? I would say that because generally speaking, Quebec has funded the most when it comes to media, partly because it has to, because of the French language thing, but also just there has traditionally been higher respect for the power of democracy in Quebec. I think it's very much a French descendancy thing. For example, when you go to the Quebec Parliament, in the middle of the Parliament, there's a a painting of the Quebec Parliament being burned to the ground. And underneath it, it says, "We believe in the absolute freedom of expression to protect democracy at all costs," or some such. I'm not quoting it. This is a paraphrase. And you look at that and you're like, yes, I think that is truly a Quebec value. Quebec values intellectual discourse, I think, more than the rest of the country. To our detriment sometimes, when we minimize people's religious views and rights to, for example, wear hijabs and stuff like that. So but that I think is an accidental result of having such a high respect for intellectualism, for democracy, for the discussion and separation of the state and religion, the state and media. I think, in my opinion, Quebec has one of the highest values of democracy and freedom of press in the country. But that's just, my view. I don't know if you agree with that.
No. Honestly, I was just interested to hear your thoughts. Yeah, I think that's a good point about the funding.
Yeah.
Very essential.
It's truly just because I think just a result of the French language thing. But I think the French language thing has separated Quebec enough from the rest of Canada that some of the discourse that I think is, like, I've never heard a Quebec politician say, oh, the dumb media. That just doesn't really happen. They're more like, oh, those dumb Anglophones, you know, like, like they're more concerned about that. They're not sitting there ragging on the media, you know. I haven't seen that. Whereas out west and in the English-speaking provinces, you have a ton of people, just especially who are more conservative, who hate the media, who think that journalists are liberal, wealthy people, which is very confusing. I ain't wealthy. I don't think Savanna's wealthy, y'all. I'd love to be wealthy, mind you.
Don't go into journalism if you
want money. Like, you chose the wrong profession. So yeah, I think Quebec has exceptional values when it comes to intellectual discourse and the independence of the media. So I think Quebec could be a leader on this kind of subject, and especially with our separate constitution, essentially. I think we could be the first province to push for true independence of the media and protection for the media. François Legault, if you're listening, credit me.
We needed something uplifting in this podcast.
Yeah. I think Quebec is. The police are not. The Montreal police are famously bad, but I think the government as a whole. Like, I don't think François Legault disrespects democracy the way that he is technically a conservative guy, but when you look at him versus Danielle Smith, the man is not a conservative relative to her. You know, he does not that man does not disregard democracy. He talks about voting. He talks about the rights of the people. Even though I don't agree with a lot of things he says, he's very much a man who believes in democracy, right? So, nonetheless, change your policies, sir. How? I think you said you didn't have a ton to say to this, but how has the rise of digital technology led to more suppression of the media?
Yeah, I think what I would say to that is probably the points I shared about deepfake.
Right.
Is that I think, it's, I mean, I think it's been very interesting to see the way media has changed with technology. I think there's been a lot of advancements. I also think that it is important for people to feel more connected to the journalists who tell their stories. And, I think there's been for so long such a disconnect from journalists and the public, just in terms of, the way it's presented, these anchors in this big, well-lit room. And I think people can feel disconnected from it. And
in 2024, people like feeling connected to whom they watch.
Yeah. And I think, even with myself, like I do very low budget journalism. It's often me bixing somewhere to go cover something.
You run basically the whole media.
I run the production side of things.
The production over at CUTV.
Yeah, and I do,
as well as doing the reporting.
Yeah. It's busy. But I think I won't speak for everyone, but I think some people can feel more connected to me because they can come up to me and have conversations, and there's less of this barrier between me and this big fancy newsroom. But I think with technological advancements, there are issues as well, such as deepfake, which I mentioned earlier, but also harassment campaigns on journalists.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there are a lot of people who disagree with my reporting, who will call me things like a Hamas content creator, which
wild.
I think. I mean, the thing about these,
it's bad faith.
Yeah, and I think like these comments really don't bother me at all. But I think it's kind of, I mean, my take on those comments is that I'm actually just at these protests showing what's going on. You can determine my politics if you want. out of what I cover. But I think that, with being a lot closer to people on social media and in the public, and not just myself, any journalist, you are putting yourself at risk for, harassment campaigns. And this has been something happening to a lot of journalists, and specifically women journalists. Like I know a journalist I spoke with a few months ago after my arrest, and she told me about, being critiqued over what she was wearing when she was covering, people calling her fat, things like this. And it's like, this really has nothing to do with the reporting. Like, can't you just focus on the story? Is that not why you're here? So, I mean, I think there's technological advancements and there's also technological disadvancements.
It's complicated, isn't it? Because on one level, more people can report very serious issues, For example, this isn't really journalism, but it kind of is, but people from Palestine who are showing you what's going on versus the media in the United States, which is like, it's not that bad, but you're watching it on TikTok and you're like, it's pretty bad. It's pretty violent. I'm seeing dead bodies. It's terrifying. But on the other hand, more people believe they are experts, and people are harassing people who don't agree with them, even though it's just reporting. It's not necessarily with an agenda. Mm-hmm. Would you prefer not to know what's going on? Is that what you're saying? Because if that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
I want to know what's going on. And so it's a complex subject. There's also the question of algorithms and what these social media sites will show people. Mm-hmm. Meta has blocked any journalism being shared.
Yeah.
So
I have an issue with that.
It's crazy.
And it's a government policy too.
It was a well-intentioned government policy, I think.
It has not worked out.
It really hasn't.
and it's really targeted outlets such as our own.
Yeah, independent outlets.
Yeah.
It hasn't. It has done nothing to CBC basically, and yeah, it's very frustrating. But the intention was to pay the media outlets. But if you're gonna threaten a big company like Meta, you better be prepared to fight. And they weren't. They thought it would work. And then when Meta was like, okay, we just won't do anything about it, they should have said, okay, you are no longer welcome to operate in our country then.
Yeah.
Goodbye. That's what they should have done. It was pretty clear. But then, it turns out Meta bluffed harder.
It's been 2 years.
It's been 2 years, guys. And just so you know, no one's talking about it in the government anymore. They've just sort of accepted it.
And they're still flagging places. CUTV got flagged maybe a month or two ago. And it took a lot of posts down from my account. And some people thought I was scared after my arrest and deleting stuff. I was like, no, it's just Meta caught us.
Because journalists like us are trying to find ways around it. So like posting reels that are not technically the news.
Yeah, or like every time you get flagged, they make a new account. Like, I know that's a tactic. And it's frustrating because, independent outlets, there's not a lot of money. There's not many people, and they're there because they're really passionate, and they work really hard, and building a following, and even developing these reels, these posts. It takes a lot of work, and then for Meta to be like, "Oh, you're news," it's like, thanks for validating us, but like now this sucks because we're taking down.
I feel validated, but I now am poor because of it.
Thanks for seeing us as journalists.
That's amazing. Why? Okay, this is kind of a personal question for us as journalists to answer. Mm-hmm. Why would we keep doing this? Why would we keep working in an industry that's collapsing financially and being disrespected and disregarded by much of the public?
Yeah.
Why do you keep doing it, Savanna? That's what I'm asking. Existential question.
Yeah, important question.
Yeah.
I think there's many different reasons. I think it's morals. I was very much raised, to not give up, even though I'm going through these challenges right now. I believe that it can be a test of almost, is this job really meant for you? Do you really believe in these morals? Do you believe in what you're reporting on? And I would say I always did, but now that I'm going through, I believe that what I'm doing is absolutely essential.
It is, yes.
And I will not be intimidated. And, it makes me, I'm very passionate about what I do. And I believe that people should have this information. And, specifically when it comes to my reporting on the Gaza protests, reporting on Palestine, it's not something I started in October. I've been doing it for the last 8 years. But because I have an understanding of the historical context, I have been reporting on the Palestinian diaspora for many years now. I thought that it was absolutely important for someone like me who understands these things, has a professional connection with the community, to be there reporting on these protests, especially while so many outlets are calling them terrorists. I was like, I need to be there and show the truth. And now it's coming to me where I'm being targeted, I'm being harassed online. And I knew that this, it could always be a risk that I could face intimidation tactics. But I won't stop. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If people doing morally correct things stopped every time they had pushback, we would probably never advance as human society. And it's necessary. Like you said, you believe in democracy, you believe in information, you believe in learning and talking about serious matters. And it's tough. It's always going to be tough, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was probably a time when it was less tough, but it was probably still tough. Like,
Mm-hmm.
You think about the old school reporters, which I love reading about some of those guys who were just hard dudes, just hard people, because they would get death threats, or like they'd be in like a active war zone and they were there.
Mm-hmm.
World War
Mm-hmm.
II reporters,
Mm-hmm.
unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
They were in the front lines. Chris, the main investigator and reporter of the Rover, went to the front lines of Ukraine. We need that.
Yeah.
What would we do without that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not an easy job, but I know that there's nothing else in the world I believe that I should do. I'm like, this is it.
Yeah.
So if it's it, I'm gonna give it my all. Yeah.
Do you think there will be cascading effects due to the suppression of media? Do you think this will have an effect on democracy, on freedom, on rights?
I think so. I mean, I think something that has been a little bit weird for me after the arrest is people seeing me as this victim and approaching me as this victim. And I don't think I'm a victim. I think I'm just someone who's going through a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that, while I really appreciate when people, check on me and they approach me with compassion, that always means a lot to me. I don't want people to focus on me within this situation. I think the focus should be on how this is yet another case of press freedom violations. And I think the effect that I'm so concerned about, and I always try to mention when I am invited to have these conversations, is that I'm really concerned about how this trend will deter future journalists from getting in this industry, and not just getting in this industry, but reporting on things such as Brandy Maureen, who was reporting on a homeless encampment, such as what Una was reporting on, what I've been reporting on, that there will be less journalists on the scene because they believe that they could be, very understandably, they believe that they could be arrested. And I think that that's something I'm really concerned about, because we need to be on the scene. And I think that I'm concerned about not just the fact of of less journalists being on the scene and this information not getting to people. But what happens when we're not there? How are these arrests carried out? Even in the case of Amber Bracken, who's currently taking the RCMP to court over her unjust arrest and during the Wet'suwet'en protests, one of her recordings, when some of the activists were being arrested, they were treated very terribly. They got called names. I researched it before. I wish I had pulled it up, but maybe I can check it out later. But her recordings are now being used in their own court case. So I think that it's important for journalists to be there to have, not just get the information out there, but to hold institutions and powers in our society accountable. And, if we're not there, I'm concerned.
I would be concerned too. You think about police brutality and all that stuff, but imagine unchecked what power does, right? Unchecked power is not a good thing.
It's very concerning.
The first thing that Napoleon Bonaparte did when he took over France after the French Revolution was he created all his own newspapers that he controlled. Do you know why? So he could inform the people what he wanted. Do you know what communist China, communist Russia did with absolute totalitarian control? They have one news station. I think they might have more than one, but it's all controlled by the state. Mm-hmm. The moment you have state control or you have less freedom, you have propaganda, right? Even if you don't agree with the reporter you are watching, you can discover information to the contrary. You can confirm it with a bunch of other sources. You can almost always double check their information. In Russia, currently, under Putin, you have to believe what they are saying because the only media that exists, especially after the start of the Ukraine war, the only media that exists is Russian state media. Mm-hmm. And unless you want to become like Russia, we need the media. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we want to become like Russia.
I mean, we even have issues here of like propaganda.
Totally.
So it's like we gotta keep it in check.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like constant propaganda. You think about, political leaders say shit that's A, heinous, B, lies constantly. Without people like AP or CBC who have the resources to just have an entire article fact checking, what would we do? What would AP fact checks everything? It's amazing. AP is amazing. AP is such an amazing source of information globally. And you think about how some of their reporting, it's crazy to me. Some of the stuff they report on, a few years back, there was a genocide going on in Ethiopia. Okay, it was maybe 2-3 years ago. You probably haven't heard about it. You might have. But a lot of people watching this might be like, pardon? Because no one reported on it. You know who did? AP. What would we do without institutions like that? Who are out there in dangerous situations, taking photos, seeing things that no one wants to see so that we can have freedom globally.
It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really concerned about it.
I am too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am too, especially when the government, potential future Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre, PMPP.
Just get that trademarked.
I really
like I haven't heard that one yet.
We have PSPP here in Quebec. Paul Saint-Pierre, Plamondon. Okay. And then we have PMPP.
It really rolls off your tongue so smoothly.
But when you have the probable future Prime Minister demonizing any media that disagrees with him, that is how you destroy the foundation of a society. It's when you ruin the expression of the press.
And I think too, coming back to your earlier question, another concern I have is, journalists who are taken to court, they're still taken off the scenes of their job, because it's not even just them having to show up to court, but it's the act of defending themselves, and it really, I mean, it takes over your whole life to be arrested and to have to defend yourself, and I mean, we should just be doing our jobs.
Yep.
I think that's all I want to do. I think that's all other journalists want and have wanted to do when they are arrested or were arrested.
They're trying to show truth to people.
Yeah.
And hold power accountable.
Yeah.
I think that's most 98.99% of journalists' intention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to say before we call it quits?
Yeah. I mean, it's something I mentioned earlier, but I do just really want to encourage people who, look at my case, look at Una's case, look at the various other journalists who have been targeted and face legal repercussions for their reporting, especially while reporting on, many things that aren't often given coverage, is to not be deterred, that this work is essential. And, we need journalists like this. We need many of us on the scene. So, be strong. It's not an easy job for many, many reasons.
Yeah.
But, we need to be there. Yeah. Thank you so much for
Thank you for coming on, Savanna, without an H. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day, coming all the way to the middle of nowhere, and talking in Maison ta mère. My house is called Maison ta mère, in case you're wondering, which means house your mom. And it's not even proper grammar. It's not even like the house of your mom. It is house your mom.
If you're not careful, the French language police will come for you.
I don't care. Bring it on. Maison ta mère forever. Seriously, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and this discussion. And guys, if you are concerned about the state of media, I recommend you write into your MP and talk about the bill that is suppressing the information that we get on Meta. The government either needs to take further measures to force Meta to comply, or remove that measure for Meta. I don't know what they need to do, but they need to do something. They're not talking about it. I encourage you to write in, to take action, to be somebody who is a voice of reason, who shares things. For example, liking and subscribing to us and giving us money at therover.ca/support us. You like how I transitioned to that?
Yeah, it was great.
You can totally support us. We believe in the freedom of press. We also believe that we want to fight for your freedoms, for our freedoms, for the future of Canada, because we love Canada, we love Quebec. And thank you so much for following. Check out Savanna on her social medias at
Savanna Craig.
That's really easy, without an H.
No H, 2 N's.
And you can check me at Isaac A. Wild on Instagram. I don't have a Twitter because I find that place to be a cesspool of, it's like a hellish landscape of just nonsense. There's not a single good thing going on there. There's good people, but like everyone thinks that one-liners will change the world. I'm like, stop it, y'all. Anyways, I hate Twitter. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your life.